Well, we're going to be talking here with Chris Robertshaw about what happened, of course, at the Tribunal, which was on this week. They set aside 3 days. In the end, 2 days was all they got. This followed on from the High Court proceedings the week earlier, which was basically trying to stop that tribunal, and said they were working outside their powers. And in itself, that was quite mind-blowing, just to believe that even at that late stage, the DHSC was going to try, and when I say DHSC, I mean the government people, try to stop the work, stop that process continuing. And I mean, in the report that came out, they made it very clear that they did have the power. Obviously, they had the power because the High Court said so. But just, I mean, we have touched on this already in the past, but still quite a thing to be doing at the latest stage possible, and changing your representation and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, I think it's important to say that the AG's appeal on the basis that the tribunal was acting outside its remit and authority, the chairman of the tribunal quite clearly states, well, we never intended in any shape or form to go outside our authority, and we'd had a number of engagements with the AG's department, and that matter could have been clearly and quickly dealt with and would have effectively negated the whole necessity for the appeal. So it begs the question, why on earth did the AGs go to an appeal in the first place when they didn't need to, and they could have just carried on engaging with the tribunal and with Rosalind Ranson's side to move things forward. So it was completely unnecessary, waste of time and waste of money. What
became interesting though was there was no more AGs. They've now, it appears there's confliction there, there's something in front of the courts, and we had Callum Wilde there. We had 3 different people. We had some worked there at the High Court, then on the second day we had Mr. Callan, and then when we got to the tribunal we had Mr. Wilde, all of course using, and quite rightly so, that they didn't really have the full facts available because they took over so late in the day.
And that's effectively what foreshortened the latest tribunal sitting, because Callum Wilde simply were not properly briefed, and as you said, there were different advocates from that practice appearing at different times, all taking it into turns, saying, well, we're not really up to speed here yet. And the point has been made by others very clearly that there was ample opportunity for the AG to step back much earlier. It was almost as if they intentionally left it to the last minute to, as it were, slow process.
That could be your opinion.
It's a subjective opinion.
And I know from the lawyers that this is used as a ploy. It has been many times. It's an old ploy to change counsels. And again, you can always use that in surmising and not making any references or allegations on this particular case. But it didn't help, did it? Because in the tribunal this week, when we walked in, there was a desk that said witnesses, and that's how it was set up, because at one stage it was hopeful that there were going to be people there actually responding, because it was a fact-finding tribunal. They got that through, didn't they? Because
I think we can capture it quickly and easily by saying the AGs give every impression of slowing things down and narrowing the focus as much as possible. And later on in this exchange, Paul, I hope we look a little bit more closely at what the role of the AGs is in an issue of this import, because as both the High Court and the Tribunal have identified, there is considerable public interest in this matter, and little wonder. On the one hand, yes, it is a matter of an employment tribunal doing its best to arrive at conclusions in terms of the awards, because its judgment is already out. But it's also, and I've alluded to this pretty well all the way through, I think, there's something that lies beneath all this that needs to be discussed.
Which want your cockroaches and the light being shone on them and stuff.
No, worse than that, the whole structure of how our system of government is working, its relationship with the tribunal. Can I start?
Well, you're going to talk about the reasoning, right? Which is what came out on Friday.
Yeah,
which is quick, I thought. I don't know if that's...
Yes, it was.
It seemed very punctual to have all this
absolutely
in the public domain. And by the way, he says early on, they have never seen 40 people in the public galleries for anything like this, which shows you the interest. And obviously the people have been watching these videos massively bigger than normal.
This is about Rosalind Ranson. It's about her employment, but at a different level. it's also about our health service and its future.
But on that, this is all costing money, isn't it? Let's deal with that. All these appeals, all this new representation, someone, and I mean the government, have to pay for that. It has to come out of somebody's purse, and it doesn't sit well, does it? That instead of just getting on with doing the health service, there's all this money being spent on presumably protecting people, and I mean by that civil servants, and who knows if it goes high with politicians, I don't know, but this is money that could just have been saved, and they could have just dealt with this in a clearer, hold their hands up and just settle it. Do you not think?
Yeah, that's the settlement. What I'm alluding to here is deeper problems. And I'll start, if I may.
You can.
At
the very beginning.
At the paragraph 24 of the Tribunal's latest reasoning, and if I may read it out.
I'm going to look at it as well.
Okay.
Yeah, you read it out.
Paragraph 24. Miss Magson has played a pivotal role on behalf of the DHSC with regard to departmental preparations leading to the liability hearing. However, Miss Magson is based in the United Kingdom and so is outside the jurisdiction of the Tribunal. She would have no need to comply with a witness order, even if issued by this tribunal. Paragraph 25 goes on to say, Mr. Wilde, that's Colin Wilde, also made clear that the DHSC has no power to ensure her cooperation, given that she's now no longer fulfilling the role of CEO. Without question, sworn affidavits from her would have been of considerable assistance to the tribunal. Okay? So that's stating Catherine Magson is out with the authority of this tribunal. Now I want to refer you secondly and link the two together. In a way, what I'm trying to do here is I describe it as a jigsaw puzzle where various elements, if you bring them together, creates a story. And this is what I'm trying to do now.
You're joining the dots.
Trying to. At an earlier element of the tribunal, the original one, the Rosalind Ranson's advocate asks David Ashford, he asked the question, you're in charge of DHSC, aren't you? And David Ashford replies, hang on, we need to be very careful about what the role of the minister actually is. The role of a minister is defined by the Government Code and the Government Departments Act. The role of a minister is in relation to policy making. The role of operation on the ground is actually a completely separate issue. When a minister takes office, they sign a delegation in relation to all matters relating to operational control to the accountable officer for the department. The accountable officer for the department is Catherine Magson, but she's not accountable. Now, this is where it starts to get really serious, in my view. If that's the case, you might say, well, that's gone and been and gone and done. But I know it's not. I don't believe it is for a moment, because Andrew Foster, who is the chairman of Manx Care, effectively resides in the UK and operates the chairmanship, sometimes presumably on Ireland and sometimes remotely. But if it was the case, and I'd be interested to hear legal opinion on this, if it is the case that he at some point stepped down from that role as chairman of Manx Care, isn't he exactly then in the same position as Catherine Magson, out with the authority, control, accountability of Isle of Man courts, Tynwald, Council of Ministers, everybody? And then you look at some of the other members of the Manx board and they're in exactly the same position.
Can I just inject one thing? If nothing else, there would normally be a paper trail of the meetings and what was discussed. And so many times it appeared that the minutes weren't there, they hadn't taken minutes, or they had ripped them up at the end of various meetings. Does that also not help this?
Well, it hinders it, but it also darkens the matter, because I think it's fair to say that Andrew Foster has appeared to be a character who does not like to write things down. I mean, the famous Grantham meetings, for example.
Well, they weren't sure if it was, didn't they? I mean, I thought there was a bit of confusion of exactly where they did.
Well, it was confusing because there were no records kept, or then we heard, yes, there were records, but they were destroyed. That's becoming a popular theme, that, isn't it?
Why would you destroy the minutes of a meeting straight after it?
That made big decisions off island by, I would argue, unaccountable people. And I remember when I sat in the tribunal, the original tribunal sitting, when Andrew Foster was in attendance on that occasion, I have to say, and it's a subjective opinion, he looked reluctant, and he looked inclined to want to minimise his answers rather than be fulsome and open. And he is the man who is now the chairman of Manx Care. But I was going on to say then that a number of the other, as I understand it, other members of the board of Manx Care are also in the same position.
The position being off island?
Off island, yes. Now, what is it that makes off-island medics working on the island accountable to the Isle of Man? And that's very simple, as I understand it. It's because they are members of a profession, and their professional body effectively keep them accountable wherever they may be. These people, Catherine Magson, Andrew Foster, other members of Manx Care, they're not medics. They're business people. And they are as I've tried to argue, in a position to remove themselves from accountability to the Isle of Man should they so choose. And something else which, is another part of the jigsaw puzzle. Do you remember when Rosalind Ranson, in all those difficulties, reached out to Sir Jonathan Michaels to say, to help effectively? And his reply, his answer was, leave it. You will lose.
He got described in the tribunal on day one, because I've made a note of it, Sir Jonathan Michael, a shadowy figure. It's an amazing thing to say about somebody. Don't you think that's in such a position?
Well, it's beginning to...
They don't use these words carefully, don't they, as well?
It's beginning to look like that. And then you might say, oh, well, no, in his case, he is a registered clinician and therefore is accountable professionally. Well, I understand he may not still be registered as a clinician. In other words, he may now have removed himself from professional liability because effectively he's now more a businessman than he is a clinician. Which
is making the shadowy figure statement, I presume, then, making it
absolutely
not quite sure what... I don't know. I don't want to say that, but,
yes,
it doesn't read well when you see that.
But where does this take us, Paul?
Yeah.
I mean, if you also look for another piece of the jigsaw puzzle, and that's the mandate that describes the relationship, the role and responsibilities of Manx Care as granted by Tynwald. But you might vaguely recall, perhaps not, that at the time I did object to elements of that mandate, sections 6 and 8, and as I recall, I think Hansard says that I did. And those particular clauses show an enormous weakness and effectively tend to remove the significant elements of the accountability of Manx Care to effectively DHSC, but ultimately to Tynwald. So you pull all these things together, the potential non-accountability of the directors of Manx Care, the poor reporting process that allows Tynwald to consider that it is seeing Manx Care as accountable, and then you move on, where you move on from the idea that the control and accountability of our health service is effectively moving out of our control into the hands of those non-accountable to us, and then go right back with that in mind to issues which emerged during the COVID crisis, where on the one hand Rosalind Ranson was doing her best to create policy that would work well for the people of the Isle of Man. At the same time, we had Catherine Magson and the Director of Public Health, Henry Hewitt, following verbatim, lockstep, what was happening in the UK, and that's where the clash first occurred. So effectively, the initial clash was the difference between Rosalind Ranson trying to establish, in my view, the right policy for the Isle of Man, and people trying to engage in UK follow my leader approach. And yet we've arrived at a situation where now our health service is accountable, or rather answerable to non-accountable persons in the UK.
Which is ironic, because the whole idea of Manx Care was to make everything more transparent and more accountable.
Well, it's gone the other way.
But that's what it was, one of the reasons for it, wasn't it?
And did David Ashford know that he was handing the accountability for a huge department over to a non-accountable person? Did the Attorney Generals understand what they were allowing to happen from a legal perspective. Where was the oversight? What has Council of Ministers been told about this? From my perspective, the Attorney General's position seems very much one of honing down, as we said earlier, trying to limit the reach of this whole matter, trying to contain the tribunal, but not doing what it should be doing, which is saying to Council of Ministers, just a minute, perhaps we are now moving, in the light of all this evidence, into a position where our health service is non-accountable to Tynwald. The people, the members of the House of Keys were elected by the people. The House of Keys in Tynwald is now losing the control and authority that it was always vested in it, and therefore the people of the Isle of Man are effectively seeing their health service and their social care service become some sort of extension of a group of business people in the UK, which is completely and utterly unacceptable. So what on earth do the AG's department think that they're doing? If I'm correct in all of this, and the evidence seems to suggest that I am, then it's about time the AG's got its act together and started advising Tynwald and Council of Ministers in the way that it's supposed to do.
Well, they can't on this case because obviously there's conflict now, so they're out of the picture, aren't they?
No, I'm not talking about Rosalind. No,
you're talking in general.
I'm saying what lies beneath here now,
yeah.
And this matters now to everybody. And in a sense, if you look at Rosalind Ranson's dismissal, effectively, wasn't she the one who was trying to raise this very point I'm making now?
I was going to use that because it's ironic because we have the current head of health and social care who says transparency and openness is key to his ethics, right?
You're talking about Laurie Hooper?
Yeah, and you got this lady who stood up and said, there's something wrong here and I want to tell you and I'm going to whistleblow, to use that word, right?
Yeah.
And this has all come about because she seems, and no, she won it, was doing the right thing.
Absolutely, that's my argument.
Exactly. So this is where the crux of the whole matter lies, is how much else has been buried 6 feet under, and where are the dead bodies, as they say?
Well, Laurie Hooper is, in answer, forgive me, correct me if I'm not absolutely correct here, but I recollect that the member of Tynwald asked Laurie Hooper, is he comfortable with people from across effectively acting in executive roles on the Isle of Man? And I think his answer was along the lines of, well, I haven't got a problem with that. Yeah. Well, let me tell the current Minister of Health and Social Care, and let me remind the previous Minister of Health and Social Care, that if they carry on in this regard, then they're really making their role completely tin pot. They're cardboard cutouts, nothing more, with no authority at all over their health. And they have the authority, they have the title, they have the money, but they have no real authority on behalf of.
You mean the Sir Humphreys are running the show?
Not even the Sir Humphreys. Manx Care is run by business people on the board from across, who we see in back to the beginning. Mm-hmm. We see in paragraph 24 that they're not accountable.
Right. Is Laurie Hooper's in a situation that, from the word go, you said that he had to think carefully about his position. Will this come back to bite him yet? Will he have to go?
Well, I think the question is getting bigger all the time now. Where on earth is the control of our health and social care service going, and how are we going to recover it? How are we going to amend the mandate so that it makes it accountable? How are we going to make sure that if we have people from across on the Manx Care board, that there's no way that they can escape by simply resigning and walking and getting on the ferry and declaring themselves, as Catherine Maxson has, as non-accountable? I think this positioning of non-accountability is going to come back and haunt DHSC, a number of members of Tynwald. It will continue absolutely to worry the people of the Isle of Man. And you will also recall, will you not, that in some of the areas that Catherine Maxson was exercising her view about her position, she referred back to, well, I am following Andrew Foster's stand. So, And I've tried to reiterate or point out that Andrew Foster gives every impression of wanting to stay removed and detached. This is something of a crisis, really.
But when you've got the health minister signing off, and I presume he had to sign off, I think that's what he didn't answer any questions when I put it to him. But, for that High Court undertaking, that money that was spent on the High Court sitting, so who in your view, would it be the minister would have to sign off on those sort of things? It would have to be, wouldn't it? To have that.
Well, he did, yeah.
And yet he's for transparency. I keep coming back to this, and I know he's saying he can't speak yet, and we're going to hear that eventually.
For goodness sake,
But
the point by point rebuttals. Just put.
Let's not go there.
Let's not go there.
Shredding letters.
Let's please.
You got some more because I obviously.
Let's worry about where we're going here. And let me ask the question.
Yeah.
I want to see, on its return, the members of Tynwald addressing these fundamental issues, not running away from, this is sub judice, which is not now. I mean, the only thing that's sub judice, effectively, is Anna Healy's appeal.
Yes, she's still in front of the course on that one. Well, not, there's sorry, litigation, I've got to be careful what wording we use here. There's something going on anyway, we can't talk about it. Hang on a second. No, we can't speak about that case.
Offering opinion. What we can identify is points made, which is on the part of the tribunal, as I understand it. They said...
Well, it's just mind-blowing that it's almost at the end. It's like the second to last paragraph. It was the big one. So, on one level, the submission may prove to be reasonable. However, reaching my conclusions on the basis leaves a cloud of uncertainty hanging over both Miss Magson and Miss Healy. For Miss Magson, the remedy lies in her own hands if she wishes to cooperate. Contrastly, for a solicitor like Miss Healy, such a cloud leaves her in an uncomfortable position with a continuing career still ahead of her. However, the tribunal is powerless to decide how best to proceed until the outcome of the appeal in the High Court, and even then, that depends on the overall approach of Chambers.
And I'm sure also the chairman's made it clear, or the tribunal's made it clear, that there was no way that they had any intention anyway of interfering with client privilege, which is the nub of the appeal before the High Court now. So, I mean, given that's the case, why on earth, back to that early question, why did these, well, I can't take a judgment on the appeal that's still to be heard, why did the AGs take these appeals to the High Court? When in fact there was a perfectly rational and straightforward route to deal with these things, these matters, as they had dealt with the complainant in the first place in other areas.
Some people may conclude that they were either slowing down the process or trying to stop it completely. But again, if you want transparency, why on earth would you do that manoeuvre, which everyone, that I've been speaking to, thought this was so ill-advised.
And where was the AG's senior oversight advice to the Council of Ministers in all of this, that in the light of the evidence that's emerging, you do realise you're losing accountability of our health service in the Isle of Man to the Council of Ministers, to Tynwald, and to therefore the people of the Isle of Man. And we, as the AG's department, consider that a matter of deep concern, and it needs addressing. Not a word. Complete silence.
Well, this isn't going away, and I think the ex-poll's due back maybe October, then they're saying it may be a bit earlier now. So that's the business about the metadata, which is obviously crucial to what's gone on behind the scenes as well, isn't it?
Well, we
can't talk about that too much, I guess, until they come back.
What we can say is we can talk about the practicalities of the tribunals sitting for 3 days, as was proposed, to look at the documentary submission side, only to find that the respondent's position, Canning Wild on behalf of DHSC, was not in a fit position to be able to present their case properly. It's been clear that they had ample opportunity, the DHSC, AGs, etc., ample opportunity to deal with these much earlier and didn't do it. And as far as the ex-poll matter is concerned, and this came out in the High Court, of course, ex-poll, and I cast no aspersions at all on ex-poll, but they are, as it were, employed by an interested party. They're not an independent body sitting twixt and between the two parties.
You wouldn't possibly think that would have anything to do with it.
I'm sure.
Shame on you.
I'm sure it wouldn't.
Didn't let that even cross your mind.
I didn't cross my mind, but what did cross my mind was why take that clumsy route in the first place?
Yeah. And I mean, who knows expertise required for all this? I mean, I'm not sure, but you could find that they had to go and get their own experts to find out the details. But let's don't speculate on that. Okay, how do we finish this one off?
Well,
I mean, the interest is massive.
An expectation now that the members of the House of Keys, the members of Tynwald, who have, generally speaking, been quiet, verging on silence on this whole issue, begin to understand where they should start questioning all these issues that we've discussed today, and examine how we can end up with a first-class mandate, an appropriate, transparent accountability, which is currently slipping from our hands like dry sand between your fingers.
And to finish how I started, how many more cockroaches are scuttling for that dark area as the light of the door opens on them?
Difficult to count because they disappear so quickly.
But do you think there's going to be more casualties? I mean, there's been quite a lot, but of course no one's, as far as I'm aware, actually has been terminated. They all just went off into the sunset, didn't they?
One of the casualties out of this undoubtedly should be the way the AG's department has been dysfunctional.
Yeah.
And if they don't sit back and examine this, in a previous interview, I think I was corrected afterwards. I said there were 45 members of staff in the AGs, and I was told no, it's 75.
But we don't know exactly what their rules are, so they're not maybe all lawyers, of course, so you've got to be careful on that one.
But there's 75 people working in the AG's department, and they cannot bring a matter of this importance, the accountability of the health service, to the attention of the Council of Ministers and Tynwald. Shame on them.
I suppose we should just point out part of this whole thing was that the search for these documents, because there was only 6 emails that were looked at, I understand, and they had very limited word sort of scope to look at. But anyway, there was 2 lists eventually turned up. There was one that the AG's got, and then there was one that they got later by doing their own asking for appeal, didn't they?
And
there was this difference.
Yeah.
So everything appears to be that Catherine Maxton had the final say on what went into this thing. And
that's
again,
been strongly suggested. She was the filter.
Well, she was. I mean, apparently that's the rope. But of course, you've got this whole thing of
this unaccountable person was the filter.
Right. But
couldn't make it up, Paul.
I've got to be so careful here. But and I'm not a lawyer and I don't understand these things. But it's interesting to hear it that you're not.
Paul. This is. People are listening to this because this is about our health and social care system, and it matters.
But you got these letters, right? And some of them are for you, and some are against. I'm talking about from the side of government. And the whole thing is, you have to hand everything over. That's the crux of it, good and bad. And this is where it seems to have failed. Until they got their own searches done, and they realised that the 2 didn't tally. And they had these, I think there's 3 potentially that are very interesting sort of why didn't that one go forward? Who knows? But
well, of course we've got another hearing now. I mean the patience of the tribunal is just it seems endless. I mean
well, they never had such a big audience either. The public watching.
They now are having another hearing. Is it November?
Yeah.
They want submissions by the 14th of September.
They've been very clear they want this thing moving, definitely.
And ultimately, we've got the remedy hearings in. And let's just touch on something about the remedy hearing before we close. Yeah. Can we do that?
We have all the time.
It's just to remind people what we're actually talking about here. There are 3 elements to the remedy. There's costs. There's aggravated
that's
damages, and then the other one, which is of very considerable interest, is exemplary damages. Now, exemplary damages...
In brackets, punitive, to explain to people.
Now, those come into focus when there has been... I don't know the exact definition, so forgive me for my inaccuracy here, but when it turns in... When it transpires, that a government or a public body has failed in its duties, and the exemplary or punitive damages would be an expression of the tribunal's view of that situation. So, I do wish once and for all that the government would just stop digging on this.
Yeah, I've got something to finish with.
Go on.
At the end of the day, and we've said this many times, this is about Rosalind Ranson getting justice. She's already had the case proven in her way. But this, because we're not under the same rules as England and Scotland, no, Wales, wasn't it? England, Wales, where you can get some money now. She can't, as I understand it, unless they all agreed.
No,
So this could go on for another year before any actual financial.
Well, it was the chairman
settlement.
of the. It was the chairman of the, it was the chairman of the tribunal who pointed out that he was unable to give intermediary award.
Which, this lady has been wronged, and I mean, it's just.
Let's summarise this.
Go on.
This, in my subjective opinion, this lady has stood up on behalf
Against
of the people,
all the odds.
against all the odds, on the part of the people of the Isle of Man, to ensure we get a good health and social care system. And the opposing body has done everything in its power to make sure that doesn't happen. And this has to now be a serious question on the floor of Tynwald. And if it's not, shame on Tynwald, I'd say.